Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Invisible Disability Education and Advocacy Association, or IDEAA. This is our very first meeting, so we will be introducing ourselves and the club, as well as letting you all know what to expect for the future. If you could go to the next slide, please. So we're just going to introduce our executive team here. My name is John. I'm the general coordinator for the club. This just means that I will be hosting meetings other than info nights, and I work mainly with club membership and student union. I'm a third-year bioinformatics major. Now, bioinformatics deals largely with the entirely clinical side of life, meaning we are not taught the human side of medicine as much as we should be. I believe in addition to being able to educate ourselves and raise money for those with disabilities, this is a good opportunity for everyone to make themselves more balanced and understand the experiences of people rather than just their disability. I think, Robin, you can go if you'd like.
For sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Robin, and I'm a third-year community rehab and disability studies student. I will be your events and social coordinator for this year. I will be communicating with the members about upcoming events through email and social media. I'm involved in invisible disability and accessibility advocacy as an ally to the community and family members with lived experiences. I look forward to working in IDEAA to expand my learning and understanding while raising much needed awareness to the challenges faced by people with invisible disabilities, and I look forward to getting to know you all this year. Next to Kaylee.
Hi, I'm Kaylee. I'm currently in my third year of Community Rehabilitation Disability Studies. I'll be handling the research portion of the club, which includes the info nights and looking for charities to fundraise with. I've always been very passionate about research and advocacy, so I'm really excited to do my part to break down the stigma surrounding invisible disabilities.
And I'm Grace. I'm a third-year bioinformatics major with a computer science minor, and I'm the financial coordinator for this club. So that basically means I'll be keeping track of all the funds that come in and making sure that they go to the proper charities, and also having a role in organizing fundraising events for this club. I'm looking forward to helping to make change in our community through IDEAA.
So I found this quote that I think kind of encapsulates what we want to be getting with this club. And it's by, I think it's pronounced Sinead Burke. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But disabilities are articulated as a struggle, an unnecessary burden that one must overcome to the soundtrack of a string crescendo. But disabled lives are multifaceted, brimming with personality, pride, ambition, love, empathy, and wit. And it really just shows that a disability isn't the person's entire self. Like, there's more to them than just their diagnosis. So part of our goals include reducing the stigma associated with disability. So how we're going to be doing this is through education, information, and by adding a human element to all the medical terminology people like to throw around. Disability is a human experience fundamentally, and it's not fair to treat people differently based on a preconceived notion of what you think about them. On to the next person.
Right. So a major goal of the club is to aid those with invisible disabilities toward reaching equality. It's important to understand that equality is something we strive toward, not something we can arrive at. As Kaylee said, stigma exists with disabilities, and day-to-day events can cause inequality. Though it should be encouraged, it's not enough to install ramps outside buildings and implement sensory-friendly shopping hours in grocery stores. Even with these things in place, the lives of those with invisible disabilities can be made more difficult by their circumstances and the people around them.
All right, a cause worth being passionate about. So there's been so much progress for the disability community in the past decade, but there is still so much work to be done. Education and advocacy for invisible disabilities can help us reduce the stigma around them and can make them seem less scary, and can help us to be better allies for the disability community in general. And on to Grace.
And our last major goal of the club is to fundraise to support ignored and marginalized communities. Typically, we'll try to have one issue that we're going to cover, and we'll have an info night about it and to learn more about it. And then throughout the period of while we're discussing that, which will probably be about a month or so, We're going to try to fundraise as much as we can, and then all funds will go towards a particular charity that acknowledges this issue. We have more on fundraising on the next slide. So because of COVID, we don't really have a lot of options when it comes to fundraising opportunities. So we're going to try to have competitions throughout the entire school year where everybody tries to raise as much as they can. We'll have more like event nights and fundraising nights as we go forward, and we'll talk more about those in later meetings. And then by the end of the year, we're planning to have prizes for the people who raise the most amount of money throughout the entire year. And of course, everything that we raise, we're trying to give as much to the charities as possible. There is the possibility that we might need to cover some of the costs that's going to need to be used to cover the cost of running the club, but hopefully member fees and our initial funds from starting up the club will be able to cover that. And as for member fees, we understand that can be difficult to collect now that this is COVID and we can't meet up in person. We have a PayPal button on our website, which you can donate to. We're going to have a $5 membership fee, but we're not really going to be strict about collecting on those yet. We're going to wait until we can meet in person. So if you want to help us out right away and pay your membership fee, go ahead. Otherwise, just don't worry about it until we meet in person again. And Kaylee will talk more about how we choose our charities.
Right, so charities are going to be chosen based on reach, transparency, and what their money goes towards. I'd really prefer to find charities that help people directly, but if a particular disability is underdiagnosed due to a lack of medical understanding, I'd look for something a little bit more research focused. And for me, the transparency is absolutely key, and that includes knowing exactly how much of their money goes to creating meaningful change in the community. Sometimes it's not going to be entirely possible to find a charity that deals directly with our diagnostic umbrella, especially as we start to move towards more rare diagnoses, or if a particular invisible disability, such as like addiction or dementia, focuses really on a specific group of people, we could then gear our fundraising more towards like a homeless shelter or an old folks home. So going on to Diagnostic Focus, if we can, we'll choose a focus that has some sort of awareness day in the month we're choosing it, or we're going to be fundraising for it. I'll come up with a list of a few options and get our lovely members to vote on what they're most interested in learning in and fundraising for. You're always welcome to email me if you have any ideas and we can look into it. I'm happy to consider lots of options. And considering a disability invisible can get subjective really quickly. So in general, I'd like to focus on disabilities that are either ignored by larger society or not immediately visible to the naked eye. This can get tricky with some disabilities that folks use mobility aids to mitigate, but in general, if their body looks fairly normative without the mobility aids, I'd consider it invisible. And as always, if you have questions or concerns, feel free to email me. I'm by no means an expert, so my ears are always open. And just a heads up, when I use the words normal or normative, I don't mean normal as in what it should be. I mean statistically normative and what is viewed as normative by the outer society. Some issues faced by the invisible disability community. So social isolation is a huge issue for many people with invisible disabilities. It's incredibly frustrating to be dealing with so much but look fine to people who see them. And it kind of feels like it's delegitimizing their suffering because people can't see how much they're going through. So their ideas of success and failure may also vary from the norm. So when they have success, other people may view it as an average daily thing, even though the person with the disability may view it as a huge milestone, which gets frustrating and disheartening really quickly. There's so many types of stigma that people with invisible disabilities face, from people thinking they're faking it or being lazy, to people saying that what they're dealing with isn't a disability because they look, again, here's this useless term, normal. They may also deal with stigma from within the disabled community since their body looks more normative and they can therefore pass as able-bodied, which gives them some amount of privilege. Accessibility can also be a huge problem for people with invisible disabilities. They're less likely to receive accommodations because they visibly pass as able-bodied, even though they may not be able to do the same things as an able-bodied person. So an example of this is some people with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS for short. They may get a handicap parking permit so that they have a shorter distance to walk from their car to inside the store where they can use a scooter or another mobility aid, but they may face judgment for this since they look fine and could therefore lose accommodations because of people's judgment and stigma. So what I really want to talk about is why stigma exists in the first place. People get extremely uncomfortable when they're confronted with disability, and part of this seems to be because they'd rather not think about how them or any of their loved ones could become disabled at any moment. It's really the impermanence of one's health that tends to be unsettling, which in part is generally tied to the innate human fear of death. So I found just anecdotally that the more comfortable people are with their mortality and impermanence, the more comfortable they tend to be with disability, and vice versa. People who are terrified of death haven't really confronted their own fragile health. They won't be as comfortable with this. They won't be as comfortable with the concept of disability. And invisible disabilities have an extra layer of stigma on them, in part because able-bodied people are extra uncomfortable with the idea that people they know could be disabled without them knowing it, which is a little bit invasive, but we'll get there. This line of thinking doesn't make a lot of sense until you remember how terrified most people are of their own impermanent nature. It's really the whole idea of change and impermanence. And disability can also be a political entity. I want to touch a little bit on Marxist disability here in particular. Sorry, Marxist disability theory, I'm skipping words. Lots of how we ascribe value to people in our current society has to do with how much money they make or how they contribute to the economy or how productive they are. So in this view of things, people with disabilities are then valued less. In Marxist theory, all people should have inherent value regardless of how they can contribute to a capitalist economy. Human life has inherent value regardless of how they contribute to society. Then I think Robin's here.
All right, defining disability. So what is a disability and what does that mean? A disability is any condition of the body or mind that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities and interact with the world around them. According to the World Health Organization, disability has 3 dimensions: impairment, activity limitation, and participation restrictions. So, medical and social models. What are they? In the disability community, there are several known models, but we will be discussing the 2 major ones, the social model and the medical model. So, the medical model of disability views disability as a problem that belongs to the individual with the disability. It is not seen as an issue to concern anyone other than the individual affected. For example, if a wheelchair-using student is unable to get into a building because of some steps, the medical model would suggest that this is because of the wheelchair rather than the steps. In contrast, the social model of disability would see the steps as the disabling barrier. This model draws on the idea that it is society that disables people through designing everything to meet the needs of the majority of people who do not have a disability. There is a recognition within the social model that there is a great deal that society can do to reduce and ultimately remove some of these disabling barriers, and that this task is the responsibility of society rather than the individual with the disability. So a little side note, we don't think the medical model is bad. I think the medical model and the social model can complement each other very well, but the medical model has a bad reputation because of its oppressive past. So to continue, what is person first versus identity first language? So person first language is putting the word person or people before the disability. An example would be a person with epilepsy. Identity first language is using the disability first in the description. So an example of this is saying an epileptic person. Out of respect, most people prefer the person first language because people are more than their disability, and that's how they want to be seen. So some specific disability communities, such as autistic and deaf communities, will primarily use identity first language. People have different preferences in how they like to be addressed and described, so it can be different for everyone. In this club, we will primarily use person first language unless we are referring to a community that primarily uses identity first language, or if anyone tells us their specific preference, it's really up to the person. Now to Kaylee for the rest.
All right, so I want to touch a little bit on connotation and denotation. So the denotation of a word is the actual definition that it has, what you'd see in a dictionary. The connotation is more the emotional flavor or the vibe of the word. So for example, disability and impairment could technically mean the same thing denotationally, but those two words have such vastly different emotional and historical context that they should be used in different circumstances. And why does language actually matter? It has a lot to do with connotation. The way a person uses language is tied to how they think. If you're into linguistics, you'd know of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, pretty much it. And if they show that they're consciously adopting their language to be more courteous and respectful of other people, that would then show that they're taking the time and the effort to change how they think to be kinder. And with emotional labor, this is really important, especially because we're going to be having guest speakers in to talk to us about their lived experiences. This is the idea that it can be extremely emotionally taxing for somebody to take the time to explain their life to you. Emotional labor should be valued just as much as other types of labor, yet so often people with disabilities are expected time and again to explain their existences, even though able-bodied people rarely have to. So with our guest speakers, they're taking a huge amount of emotional labor. They're taking their time to come speak with us. So it's really important that above all, we're respectful, we're thoughtful, and we're kind. Even if you're not sure about your exact language, just do your best and we can help you out.
So I'd like to talk about the website a little bit. So I'd like to encourage everyone to visit IDEAA.com or IDEAA.ca, sorry, which is IDEA with 2 A's, by the way. So there you will find more information about us, as well as all of our individual contact information and social media for us and the club. As Grace said earlier, there's a PayPal donation button in the contact page if you'd like to support the club and therefore disability charities, because we're going to be donating almost all of it to charities that Kaylee will be selecting. Also, if you're not already signed up for our emails, so if you didn't get an email saying that this meeting was going to be happening, then please go to the Join Us page on idea.ca and enter your name and email. You will shortly get a Clubs Hub invitation, which you can just accept, and then you'll be on our mailing list. So yeah, that's about it for the website.
All right, for emails, I will be sending monthly newsletters about what's currently happening with our club and for updates on upcoming events. In the newsletters, we will also include some special news that we find or talking about awareness months. So I will also be regularly emailing about our fundraising opportunities. Speaking of fundraising, for our events, we will not be able to hold any in-person events because of COVID, but we do plan on holding regular events online. So stay tuned for that, and we hope to do some social events as well. And lastly, our Facebook page. We have a Facebook page, so make sure to follow us on there for updates as well. Please feel free to email us or message us if you ever have any questions or want more information about us. And yeah, we will keep you updated if we also make a new social media page in the future. And welcome to IDEAA. Let's create some change, and thanks for watching our presentation. Anyone else want to add anything?
Thanks for joining us. I think that's about it for us.
We're really excited to have you on board this year. It's going to be a great year.